I left my toxic family for favoring the golden child. Now they're begging me to come back. My name is Joyce, and at 32, I finally built the life I always dreamed of as an art gallery curator in Seattle. 3 years ago, I made the hardest decision of my life, cutting all ties with my toxic family, who never saw my worth. Now they're desperately calling, begging me to come back and help them. The same parents who always chose my brother over me suddenly need me. Funny how life works, right? Before I dive into how I finally stood up for myself after 30 years, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button if you've ever had to choose your own happiness over family expectations. Growing up in a middle-class suburban neighborhood in Minneapolis, my childhood from the outside probably looked perfectly normal. Our two-story house with the white picket fence and neatly trimmed lawn gave no indication of what was happening inside. Our family of four consisted of my stern father Richard, my perfectionist mother Diane, my younger brother Adam, and myself. From my earliest memories, there were subtle signs that something wasn't quite right. When I was 5, I painted a picture of our family that my kindergarten teacher praised as showing unusual talent for my age. I proudly brought it home, expecting my parents to hang it on the refrigerator. Instead, my mother glanced at it and said, "That's nice, Joyce, but look at this math worksheet Adam brought home. He got all the numbers right and he's only 3. That became the pattern of my childhood. Any accomplishment of mine was quickly acknowledged, then immediately overshadowed by something Adam had done. It wasn't that my parents were openly cruel or abusive. In fact, that might have been easier to identify and address. Their favoritism was subtle, consistent, and utterly devastating to a young child desperate for approval. By age 7, I had discovered that art was my passion and my escape. I would spend hours in my room drawing and painting, creating worlds where I was valued. Meanwhile, Adam was being enrolled in accelerated learning programs, children's science camps, and junior math competitions. When I was 8, something happened that I now recognize as the first major red flag. My art teacher entered one of my paintings in a regional children's art contest, and to everyone's surprise, I won first place. The ceremony was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon, and I was bursting with excitement. "Mom, Dad, my ceremony is at 3 on Saturday. My teacher says I need to be there by 2:30 to get ready," I announced at dinner. My father barely looked up from his plate. "This Saturday, I think we have something else going on." My mother checked her planner. "Oh, Joyce, I'm sorry. Adam has a spelling bee preparation session that afternoon. We've already paid the registration fee." "But can't Adam go alone? Or maybe just one of you take him?" I asked, my voice small. "It's very important for his development," my mother explained. "Maybe your teacher can take some pictures and we can look at them later." That night, I cried myself to sleep. My teacher ended up driving me to the ceremony, and when I received my little trophy and certificate, I looked out at the audience filled with other parents beaming with pride and felt the empty space where mine should have been. The following week, Adam participated in his spelling bee. He didn't win, he didn't even place, but my parents arranged a special family dinner to celebrate his participation. "It's important to recognize effort," my father said as he raised a toast to Adam. As we grew older, the pattern solidified. I took on more and more household responsibilities, learning to cook and clean by the time I was 10, because my mother was busy helping Adam with his homework or taking him to extracurricular activities. "Joyce is so independent," my mother would tell her friends, as if my self-sufficiency was a personality trait, rather than a necessity born from neglect. By 12, I had become quite the little homemaker. I could prepare simple meals, do laundry, and keep my room spotless. "Joyce is such a help around the house," my mother would say while Adam was focusing on his potential. What made it all so confusing was that they weren't bad parents in the conventional sense. They provided for my basic needs. They never hit me or called me names. They enrolled me in school, bought me clothes, and occasionally even praised me. But there was always an emotional distance, a lack of genuine interest in who I was becoming. I remember once overhearing my father on the phone with a relative. "Adam is really the driven one," he said. Joyce is just easy. She doesn't need much attention." I stood frozen in the hallway, a newly teenage girl, learning that being easy and undemanding meant being overlooked and undervalued. Despite everything, I maintained hope throughout my early childhood. I kept thinking that if I just achieved enough, if I just helped enough around the house, if I just became successful enough in my own right, they would finally see me. I convinced myself that their favoritism was temporary, that they were just giving Adam extra support because he needed it more, and that eventually my time would come. By the time I entered high school, I had become the queen of self-sufficiency. I had my art, a small but loyal group of friends, and a growing understanding that maybe, just maybe, my parents' approval wasn't the only validation that mattered in the world. But old habits die hard, and deep down, that little girl who just wanted her painting on the refrigerator was still very much alive inside me. Those early years laid the foundation for everything that would come later. The constant message that I was somehow less worthy of attention and investment than my brother shaped my self-image in ways that would take years of therapy to unravel. But in those early days, I didn't have the words or perspective to understand what was happening. I just knew that no matter how hard I tried, I was never quite enough. High school should have been a fresh start, but instead it only magnified the differences in how my parents treated Adam and me. I threw myself into art classes, joining every creative club I could find. My art teacher, Ms. Sampson, quickly became my champion and mentor. Unlike my parents, she saw potential in my work and pushed me to develop my skills. "Joyce, this portfolio is exceptional," Ms. Sampson told me during my sophomore year. "You have a unique perspective that many adult artists take years to develop." I clutched this praise to my heart like a precious jewel, starved as I was for validation. When I brought home my first art award from school, my mother glanced at it and said, "That's nice, dear," before turning back to Adam's calculus homework. Meanwhile, Adam was treated like a prodigy for receiving B's in his honors classes. My straight A's in advanced art courses and perfect marks in regular academic subjects were expected, not celebrated. When I made the honor roll 4 semesters in a row, my mother simply nodded. When Adam finally made it one semester, they took the whole family out to a fancy restaurant. "Your brother works so hard with his learning difficulties," my father explained when I questioned the disparity. "We need to encourage him more." It was true that Adam struggled with focus sometimes, but his learning difficulties had never been diagnosed by any professional. It was just the excuse my parents used to justify their disproportionate attention. The contrast in their investment became increasingly obvious. When Adam needed a computer for his studies, my father immediately bought him the latest model with all the accessories. When I needed art supplies, I was told they were too expensive and that I should get a part-time job if I wanted extras. So I did. At 16, I started working weekends at a local coffee shop, using my earnings to buy paints, canvases, and the occasional art book. My parents praised my work ethic, but never seemed to question why their teenage daughter had to fund her own education while her brother received everything on a silver platter. Transportation was another glaring inequality. My parents would drive Adam across town for science fairs and math tournaments, rearranging their schedules to accommodate his activities. Meanwhile, I took public buses to attend art classes at the community center, often navigating the city alone after dark. "It's good for you to learn independence," my mother said when I pointed out the unfairness. "Besides, your art classes are just a hobby. Adam's activities are investing in his future." Despite these challenges, I thrived in my art. Ms. Sampson introduced me to local galleries, helped me enter competitions, and even arranged for me to meet working artists who could offer guidance. She was the first adult who made me feel like my passion had legitimate value. "You need to apply to art schools," she insisted during my junior year. "With your talent, you could get scholarships." The college application process really highlighted my parents' favoritism. For Adam, they hired consultants, paid for test prep courses, and drove him to visit potential universities. For me, they printed out a list of local colleges and suggested I focus on practical degrees. "Art is a fine hobby, Joyce, but it's not a real career path," my father said dismissively. When I received a prestigious scholarship to attend a well-regarded art school in Chicago, their response was lukewarm at best. "I guess if it's free, you might as well go," my father said, as if I'd won a coupon for a free pizza, rather than a competitive merit scholarship that would shape my entire future. In contrast, when Adam was accepted to an Ivy League university with only partial financial aid, my parents were ecstatic. They immediately began making plans to cover his expenses, talking about taking out a second mortgage if necessary. Education is the most important investment we can make, my father declared at dinner. The irony that my education wasn't considered worthy of similar investment wasn't lost on me. By this point, resentment had begun to take root, though I continued trying to maintain family harmony. I kept cooking family meals, helping my mother with household chores, and congratulating Adam on his achievements. I believed that's what good daughters and sisters did, even when their own accomplishments were consistently overlooked. The culmination of my high school years came with graduation. I finished in the top 10% of my class and received departmental honors in art. My graduation ceremony was scheduled for Saturday morning with a special reception for honors students afterward. Adams University had a routine end-of-semester event the same weekend. "We're so sorry, Joyce," my mother told me 2 weeks before graduation. "We already committed to attending Adam's semester showcase. You understand, right? This is his first year in college and he needs our support." I understood perfectly. Once again, Adam's ordinary achievement trumped my significant one. I sat at my graduation ceremony surrounded by families cheering for their children, while mine were 3 states away, watching Adam display a basic freshman science project. My best friend Sarah's parents took photos of me in my cap and gown, and her mother hugged me fiercely. "We're so proud of you, Joyce," she said. For a moment, I let myself imagine those words coming from my own mother. That night, I stared at my honor cords and diploma, wondering if anything I ever did would be enough to make my parents truly see me. I packed my belongings for college with mixed emotions, heartbreak at yet another disappointment, but also a growing excitement for the freedom ahead. Maybe in Chicago, far from my family's shadow, I could finally become the person I was meant to be. The transition to adulthood brought new challenges and a more sophisticated version of the same old dynamic. I moved to Chicago for art school while Adam attended his prestigious university on the East Coast. My tiny dorm room was a far cry from Adam's spacious off-campus apartment, which my parents helped secure and furnish. "We want Adam to focus on his studies, not worry about living conditions," my mother explained during one of our infrequent phone calls. Meanwhile, I worked as a barista and gallery assistant between classes to afford art supplies that weren't covered by my scholarship. Despite the financial struggles, I thrived in the creative environment. My professors recognized my talent, and for the first time, I was surrounded by people who spoke my language and valued what I had to offer. I gradually built a portfolio that showcased my unique style, focusing on mixed media works that explored themes of visibility and belonging. After graduation, the real struggle began. While Adam walked straight into a management trainee position at my father's friend's company, I faced the brutal reality of breaking into the art world. I moved into a cramped apartment with 3 roommates in a questionable Chicago neighborhood, taking any job I could find related to art. "I'm working at this amazing gallery 3 days a week," I told my mother over the phone, trying to infuse enthusiasm into my voice despite the fact that I was mainly dusting frames and answering phones. "That's nice, dear," she replied absently. "Did I tell you Adam got his own office? His boss says he's on the fast track to promotion." What my mother didn't mention was that Adam's performance was mediocre at best. I learned from a family friend that he was mainly riding on connections and charm, frequently missing deadlines and requiring constant supervision. Yet in my family's narrative, he remained the golden child, destined for greatness. Meanwhile, I was developing genuine skill and work ethic. I spent every free moment creating new pieces, networking with gallery owners, and learning the business side of art. Slowly, my persistence began paying off. I sold a few pieces at local shows, received positive reviews in art blogs, and eventually landed a position curating for a small but respected gallery. Just as I was finding my footing, the financial requests began. "Joyce, sweetheart," my mother called one evening. "Adam's car broke down and he really needs a reliable vehicle for work. We've helped as much as we can, but we're wondering if you could loan him $1,000 just until his next bonus comes through." Despite barely making rent each month, I transferred the money. Adam never mentioned it again, and when I gently asked about repayment 6 months later, my mother said, "He's had a lot of expenses setting up his new apartment. You're doing so well on your own, we knew you'd understand." This became a pattern. Adam needed money for rent when he decided his apartment wasn't prestigious enough. Then he needed investment capital for a business idea that my parents described as revolutionary, but sounded vague and ill-conceived to me. Each time I was expected to contribute from my meager savings with the justification that family supports family. I worked overtime shifts and took on freelance design jobs to make ends meet, often skipping meals to save money, while still sending what I could home for Adam's latest crisis or opportunity. The loans were never repaid, never even acknowledged beyond the initial thanks. During this period, I began building a support network outside my family. My roommates became close friends who expressed shock at how my family treated me. Sarah from high school stayed in touch, visiting Chicago whenever she could and offering perspective on my family situation. "Joyce, this isn't normal," she told me during one visit after I received yet another request for money. "Your parents are taking advantage of your generous nature while enabling your brother's irresponsibility." I defended my family reflexively. "They just want what's best for Adam. He has so much potential." "And you don't," Sarah challenged. "Look at what you've accomplished with almost no support. Imagine what you could do if you invested all that money and energy in yourself instead of him." Her words planted seeds of doubt that I wasn't ready to nurture yet. But they were there, taking root in my subconscious. Another important perspective came when I met Jackson, an art dealer who became my first serious boyfriend. Intelligent and insightful, he quickly noticed the unhealthy patterns in my family relationships. "It's interesting that you're expected to financially support your adult brother while struggling yourself," he observed carefully after witnessing a stressful phone call with my mother. "It's complicated," I sighed. "Adam's always needed extra help." Jackson raised an eyebrow. "From what you've told me, he's had every advantage while you've had to fight for scraps of recognition and support. That doesn't sound like someone who needs extra help." I changed the subject, uncomfortable with his assessment, yet unable to refute it. Jackson didn't push, but he did consistently reflect back to me the disparities I had normalized, helping me slowly see my situation more clearly. The pattern continued for several years. Any career advancement I achieved was minimized while Adam's lateral moves were celebrated. When I was promoted to assistant curator, my mother's response was, "That's nice, but it's still in art, right? Not much room for growth there." 2 weeks later, Adam switched departments at the same company, and my parents called it a strategic career move, worthy of another family dinner I couldn't attend due to distance and work commitments. The financial requests escalated when Adam decided to start his own business without any relevant experience or solid business plan. My parents poured their retirement savings into his venture and then called me. "We know you've been saving for that art retreat," my mother said, referring to a professional development opportunity I'd been working toward for months. "But Adam really needs another investor to get this off the ground. It's going to be huge, Joyce. You could triple your investment within a year." I canceled my retreat plans and transferred my savings. 6 months later, Adam's business failed without ever launching a product. No one ever mentioned my money again. The breaking point was building, though I couldn't see it yet. I was 29 years old, still sending money home whenever requested, still seeking approval that never came, still putting my brother's needs before my own. But changes were coming, shifts that would force me to finally confront the unhealthy dynamic that had defined my entire life. When my gallery director recommended me for a prestigious position at a Seattle gallery known for launching significant artists' careers, I should have been purely excited. Instead, my first thought was how my family would react, whether they would finally see my worth, and how this would affect my ability to support Adam. The fact that these were my immediate concerns should have told me everything I needed to know about how deeply dysfunctional our relationship had become. The offer from the Seattle gallery arrived via email on a Tuesday morning. "We've been following your curatorial work for some time," the director wrote, "and believe you have exactly the vision and expertise we're looking for. The position includes a substantial salary increase, relocation assistance, and the opportunity to develop your own exhibition concepts." For the first time in my professional life, someone was not just recognizing my talent, but actively seeking it out and valuing it. I printed the email with shaking hands and called my parents that evening, allowing myself to hope that maybe this time would be different. "Mom, I have amazing news," I said when she answered. "The Westlake Contemporary Gallery in Seattle has offered me a senior curator position. It's one of the most respected modern art galleries on the West Coast." There was a pause before my mother responded. "Seattle. That's so far away, Joyce. Your father and I aren't getting any younger, you know. We were actually hoping you might consider moving back home soon. We could use your help around the house." My excitement deflated like a punctured balloon. "But Mom, this is a huge opportunity for my career. They almost never hire from outside their network, and the salary is nearly double what I'm making now." "Well, money isn't everything, dear," she replied dismissively. "Family is what matters in the end. Speaking of which, we're having a family dinner this Sunday. Adam has some news too, and we'd love for you to fly in for it." Despite the crushing disappointment of her response, I booked a flight to Minneapolis for the weekend, using funds I really couldn't spare. I told myself it would be good to discuss my opportunity in person, where they could see my excitement, and perhaps finally understand what this meant to me. Sunday dinner was a familiar scene. My mother had prepared all of Adam's favorite foods. My father was asking animated questions about Adam's work, and I was helping in the kitchen while trying to find a moment to bring up my news again. When Adam arrived, he announced that he had an idea for a new business venture, something involving cryptocurrency and social media marketing. Despite his track record of failed attempts, my parents listened with rapt attention, asking questions and offering encouragement. "Actually," my father said, beaming with pride, "we have some news too. We've decided to help Adam get this business off the ground properly. We're going to convert your old bedroom into an office for him so he can move back home and save on expenses while he builds the company." I stood there holding a serving dish, trying to process what I was hearing. My bedroom, the one space in this house that had ever been truly mine, was being erased to further support Adam's untested business idea. "What about my art supplies in the closet?" I asked quietly. "And my books?" My mother waved a hand dismissively. "We'll box those up for you, dear. It's not like you use them anymore and Adam needs the space. Oh, and we were hoping you might be able to contribute to the startup costs. Just a small investment, maybe 15 or 20,000. The amount she mentioned so casually represented nearly all of my savings funds I had earmarked for my move to Seattle. I set down the dish carefully, afraid I might drop it as anger rose within me. "I can't," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I'm actually going to need my savings for my move to Seattle. I've accepted the gallery position." The table fell silent. My father frowned deeply. "You accepted without discussing it with the family, Joyce? That seems very impulsive." "Impulsive, Dad? I'm 29 years old. This is my dream job." "But what about your responsibilities here?" my mother interjected. "Who's going to help us with Adam's business? Who's going to check on us when we need something?" "And what about my investment?" Adam added, speaking as if his entitlement to my money was a foregone conclusion. "I was counting on your contribution, Joyce. This could be huge for all of us." I looked at each of their faces, searching for any sign that they understood the magnitude of what they were asking me to sacrifice. There was none. In that moment, everything crystallized with painful clarity. "I've contributed to your ventures for years, Adam," I said quietly. "None of them have succeeded, and I've never seen a penny of return or even acknowledgement of my support. Meanwhile, I've built my career with almost no help from any of you." My father's face darkened. "That's not fair, Joyce. We've always supported you." "How?" I challenged, years of suppressed feelings suddenly finding voice. "By missing my graduation, by telling me my degree wasn't real, by expecting me to fund Adam's projects while I could barely afford rent." "You've never been the reliable one anyway." My father snapped the words, hitting me like a physical blow. "Always off in your own world with your art while Adam has been trying to build something substantial." My mother reached across the table to take Adam's hand. "Why can't you be supportive like a real daughter?" she asked, her voice laden with disappointment. "Adam would help you if the situations were reversed." Adam nodded, adding the final blow. It's pretty selfish to put your job above family, Joyce. We're talking about our future here. I looked at my brother, the golden child who had been given every advantage, who had never succeeded at anything, without massive family support, who still expected me to sacrifice my dreams for his whims. Something inside me broke, but in breaking it, finally set me free. I'm going to Seattle, I said, standing up from the table. And I'm not giving you money for another doomed business venture. I'm done being the family ATM while getting nothing but criticism in return. I walked out despite their protests, got into my rental car, and broke down completely. Years of suppressed hurt poured out as I sobbed against the steering wheel. Through my tears, I called Sarah, who had moved to Portland a few years earlier. They'll never change, will they? I asked when I could finally speak coherently. No, sweetie, I don't think they will, she answered gently. The question is, are you ready to change how you respond to them? That conversation became my lifeline. Sarah helped me see that what I had experienced wasn't just garden variety favoritism, but a form of emotional abuse. I wasn't the problem. I never had been. I had been systematically devalued my entire life, trained to believe that my needs and dreams were secondary, that my only worth was in what I could provide to others. Back in my hotel room, I made a decision that would alter the course of my life. I would accept the Seattle position, and I would establish firm boundaries with my family. No more sending money. No more dropping everything when they called. No more seeking approval that would never come. The next morning, I sent a brief email accepting the job in Seattle. Then I called my mother to inform her of my decision. I hope you'll support my choice, I said, but I'm moving to Seattle regardless, and I won't be contributing to Adam's new business. What followed was a barrage of manipulative tactics. My father called to tell me I was breaking my mother's heart. Aunts and uncles reached out to say I should reconsider, that family comes first. Adam sent a scathing email accusing me of sabotaging his future out of jealousy. I held firm, though each message and call felt like another wound. As I packed up my Chicago apartment, ignoring dozens of guilt-tripping texts, I felt both terrified and strangely liberated. For the first time in my life, I was choosing myself, and though the cost was high, I knew with bone-deep certainty that it was long overdue. The drive to Seattle took 3 days. With each mile that stretched between me and Minneapolis, I felt both a growing sense of freedom and waves of guilt that threatened to drown me. I had been conditioned my entire life to put my family's needs first, and breaking that pattern felt almost physically painful. My first few weeks in Seattle were a blur of apartment hunting, settling into my new position at the gallery, and battling the voice in my head that kept asking if I had made a terrible mistake. I found a small but charming studio apartment in Capitol Hill that I could just afford with my new salary. It was the first place I had ever lived completely alone without roommates to share expenses. The gallery welcomed me, warmly impressed by my portfolio and ideas for future exhibitions. My colleagues were talented, passionate about art, and refreshingly supportive of each other's success. It was a stark contrast to the competitive environment I had come from in Chicago, and an even starker contrast to the dynamic of my family. Despite these positive changes, I experienced intense loneliness. I would come home to my empty apartment after work and have to physically restrain myself from calling home, knowing that doing so would only invite more guilt and manipulation. Nights were the hardest when doubts crept in, and I questioned whether I had overreacted, whether I was the selfish daughter they accused me of being. During one particularly low moment, I called Sarah in Portland. Maybe I should have just given them the money, I said, my voice small. Maybe I am being selfish. Joyce, Sarah said firmly, you've given them money for years. Has anything changed? Has Adam ever succeeded or even paid you back? Have your parents ever recognized your sacrifices? I knew the answers. No, no, and no. You're not being selfish, Sarah continued. You're finally practicing self-care after a lifetime of self-sacrifice. There's a big difference. Sarah's support was crucial during those early months, as was the therapy I finally started. My therapist, Dr. Marina, specialized in family dynamics and helped me understand concepts that transformed my perspective. What you're describing is a classic golden child scapegoat dynamic. she explained during one session. It's a form of family dysfunction where one child is idealized while another bears the family's projections and unreasonable expectations. Your feelings of guilt aren't coming from you doing something wrong, they're coming from you breaking the unhealthy role you were assigned. These insights were painful, but illuminating. I began to see patterns that had been invisible to me before, to recognize how deeply the inequality had shaped my self-image and relationships. I started journaling, pouring out years of suppressed feelings and gradually making sense of my experiences. My work became a sanctuary. I threw myself into curating my first exhibition, focusing on emerging artists whose work explored themes of identity and belonging. The gallery director was impressed with my vision and gave me increasing creative control, validating my expertise in a way my family never had. The first holiday season away from home was both painful and freeing. I declined my mother's guilt-laden invitation, choosing instead to spend Thanksgiving with Sarah and her family in Portland. Christmas I spent alone by choice, treating myself to a nice dinner and a long walk through snow-dusted Seattle streets, feeling melancholy but also peaceful. Throughout those months, my family continued their attempts to draw me back into old patterns. My parents called regularly with emergencies that always turned out to be about Adam. His business was struggling. He needed more capital. He was stressed and not sleeping well. Each call ended with a request for money, or with my mother saying, "He really needs his sister's support right now." I maintained firm boundaries. I would listen and offer emotional support, but I would not send money, and I would end calls that became manipulative. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, going against decades of conditioning to be the supportive, self-sacrificing daughter. Adam called exactly once during this period, not to check on me or ask about my new life, but to berate me for abandoning the family when they needed me. His sense of entitlement was so profound that he couldn't even conceive of my right to pursue my own happiness. "You've always been selfish," he said, echoing our parents' narrative. "Mom and Dad gave you everything, and this is how you repay them." I had to laugh, though there was no humor in it. "Adam, what exactly did they give me that they didn't give you twice over? Name one thing." He couldn't answer, and I ended the call, blocking his number afterward. It was a small act of self-protection that felt monumental. As months passed, I began building a life in Seattle that reflected my own values and desires. I made friends through art events and a local hiking group. I started dating again cautiously, at first, still healing from the wounds of my family dynamic and learning what healthy relationships should look like. I met Thomas at a gallery, opening, a kind and thoughtful architect who listened when I spoke and showed interest in my thoughts and feelings. Our relationship developed, slowly built on mutual respect and genuine appreciation for each other's passions. When I finally shared the full story of my family with him, his response was validating in its quiet anger on my behalf. "They didn't deserve you," he said simply, "and they didn't deserve your support." As my confidence grew, so did my artistic vision. The exhibitions I curated began attracting attention in the Seattle art scene. A local arts journal published a profile of me, calling my perspective refreshingly authentic and my curation style emotionally resonant. I sent the article to my parents, still seeking some acknowledgement of my success. My mother's response was typically deflecting. "That's nice, dear. Did you see the announcement about Adam's new partnership? He's finally turning things around." A year into my new life, I realized with surprise that the constant ache of familial rejection had dulled. I still had moments of sadness and longing for the loving family I had never had, but they no longer dominated my emotional landscape. I was building something new and beautiful from the ashes of what I had left behind. I celebrated the one-year anniversary of my move with a small dinner party in my apartment, now decorated with art from local creators and filled with plants and books that reflected my personality. Looking around at the friends gathered there, including Sarah, who had flown in for the occasion, and Thomas, who had become an increasingly important part of my life, I felt a profound sense of peace. "To chosen family," I toasted, raising my glass, "and to finally being able to breathe." 3 years passed with remarkable speed. My career at the gallery flourished as I developed a reputation for discovering compelling new artists and creating exhibitions that resonated deeply with audiences. I was promoted to senior curator with my own dedicated budget and staff achievements that would have seemed impossible during my struggling Chicago days. My personal life blossomed alongside my professional success. Thomas and I moved in together, sharing a beautiful apartment overlooking Lake Union. We built a relationship based on mutual support, something I had never experienced within my family. When he was stressed about a major architectural project, I made space for his needs without diminishing my own. When I worked late preparing for gallery openings, he brought dinner to me and offered constructive feedback on my exhibition layouts. Therapy continued to help me process my past and build healthier patterns. "You've come so far," Dr. Marina told me during one session. "You've created boundaries that protect your well-being while still leaving space for potential reconciliation if your family ever recognizes the harm they've caused." My contact with my family had dwindled to occasional brief calls with my mother, during which we exchanged surface-level pleasantries. I sent birthday and holiday cards but declined invitations to visit. Adam's business ventures continued to cycle through phases of enthusiastic beginning and inevitable failure, but I was no longer expected to rescue him financially. My withdrawal from that role had forced some minor changes in the family dynamic, though the core patterns remained firmly in place. Then, on an ordinary Wednesday morning, everything shifted again. My phone began buzzing repeatedly with calls from Minneapolis numbers, first my mother, then my father, then a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. After the sixth call in an hour, alarm cut through my initial irritation. Something was clearly wrong. I stepped away from my desk at the gallery and returned my mother's call. "Joyce, thank God," she answered immediately. "We've been trying to reach you all morning." "What's happened?" I asked, bracing myself. "Is someone hurt?" What followed was a tangled explanation that gradually revealed the truth. Adam's latest business venture, something involving cryptocurrency trading, had failed catastrophically. Not only had he lost all his investors' money, but he had also taken out loans using my parents' home as collateral, without their full understanding of the risks involved. "The bank is foreclosing," my mother said, her voice breaking. "We have 60 days to come up with the money or we'll lose the house. Your father's blood pressure is through the roof, I can't sleep, and Adam is completely falling apart. We need you, Joyce." The subtext was clear. They needed my money. The financially successful daughter they had never supported was now expected to rescue the family that had consistently devalued her. "I'm sorry you're going through this," I said carefully. "That sounds incredibly stressful." "Can you come home?" my mother asked. "We need to figure this out as a family." "I have commitments here," I replied. "A major exhibition opening next week that I can't leave. Let me think about how I might be able to help and call you back." After hanging up, I sat in my office, emotions swirling. Part of me, the part still conditioned to be the family fixer, immediately started calculating how much I could contribute from my savings and investment accounts. Another part, the healthier part I had cultivated over 3 years of therapy and growth, recognized this as a potential return to toxic patterns. I called Thomas, who listened without judgment as I explained the situation. "What do you want to do?" he asked simply. "I don't know," I admitted. Part of me feels obligated to help, but another part knows this is just Adam's latest disaster that everyone expects me to clean up. "You don't have to decide right now," he reminded me. "Take time to process and consult with Dr. Marina before you make any decisions." Over the next few days, the calls intensified. Extended family members I hadn't heard from in years suddenly reached out, all with the same message: the family was in crisis, and I needed to help. My father called more emotionally vulnerable than I had ever heard him, talking about possibly having to live in their car. My mother claimed her health was deteriorating from the stress that she couldn't eat or sleep. I scheduled an emergency session with Dr. Marina and brought all my conflicted feelings to her. "It sounds like your family is in genuine financial trouble," she acknowledged. "But I'm concerned about how quickly they've reverted to seeing you as the solution to their problems, rather than holding Adam accountable for his actions." "So you think I shouldn't help?" I asked. "That's not my decision to make," she replied. "But I think you need to be very clear about what constitutes actual help versus enabling more dysfunction. Consider what you're willing to offer and under what conditions. Remember that financial support without changes in behavior will likely lead to the same situation recurring. After much reflection and discussion with Thomas, I scheduled a video call with my parents and Adam. I prepared carefully, writing down my thoughts to stay focused amid the emotional manipulation I anticipated. When their faces appeared on my screen, I was struck by how tired they looked. My father's hair had gone completely gray, and my mother seemed to have aged years in the months since I'd last seen her. Adam sat between them, eyes downcast. "We're so glad you called," my mother began. "We really need your help, Joyce. We're talking about 30 years of memories in this house, everything we've worked for." "I understand this is a difficult situation," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "I've given it a lot of thought, and here's what I can offer. I won't be providing cash to pay off the loans Adam took out. What I can do is connect you with financial counseling resources that might help you negotiate with creditors and develop a repayment plan." Their faces fell in unison. "But Joyce," my father protested, "we need actual money. The bank doesn't want counseling, they want their loan repaid." "I know," I said, "but this situation didn't happen overnight. It's the result of years of financial decisions, including repeatedly bailing out Adam's failed businesses rather than requiring him to learn from his mistakes." Adam looked up, anger flashing in his eyes. "So you're just going to let our parents become homeless because you're holding a grudge?" I took a deep breath, reminding myself of all the work I had done to recognize and counter this exact type of manipulation. "This isn't about a grudge, Adam. It's about not continuing patterns that harm everyone involved. You need to take responsibility for your actions. Mom and Dad, you have options. You can sell the house before foreclosure and find something smaller. You can explore bankruptcy protection. You can accept the resources I'm offering to help navigate those options." "I can't believe how cold you've become," my mother said, tears welling in her eyes. "This isn't how we raised you." "Actually," I replied quietly, "this is exactly how you raised me. To solve problems, to be independent, to take care of myself, because no one else would prioritize my needs. I'm just finally applying those lessons in a way that honors my own well-being too." The call ended badly with my father's anger, my mother's tears, and Adam's accusations of betrayal. I hung up despite their protests, then sat in my living room processing the complex emotions that followed. Guilt, certainly, but also a strange sense of peace. For the first time, I had maintained my boundaries despite extreme pressure to abandon them. Thomas held me as I cried that night, grieving not just for the current situation, but for the loving family I had never had, and now knew I never would. But beneath the grief was something stronger: certainty that I had made the right choice, not just for myself, but ultimately for them too. "You didn't cause this situation," Thomas reminded me, "and you can't fix it by sacrificing yourself." I nodded against his shoulder, finally believing that truth down to my bones. The weeks following my refusal to bail out my family were emotionally turbulent. I oscillated between confidence in my decision and waves of guilt that threatened to overwhelm my resolve. I kept my phone nearby at all times, both dreading and hoping for calls from Minneapolis. Initially, there was silence. Then, about 3 weeks after our video call, an email arrived from my father. It was brief and businesslike, stating that they had decided to take my suggestion and consult with a financial advisor. The tone was cold, but it represented the first time they had ever taken my advice about anything. "That's actually a positive sign," Dr. Marina noted during our session. "They're angry, but they're also taking a constructive step rather than just guilting you further." I sent resources for credit counseling and foreclosure prevention programs, keeping my responses supportive but firm. To my surprise, my mother replied with a terse thank you. It wasn't warmth, but it was communication without manipulation, which felt like progress of a sort. Meanwhile, Adam was facing the consequences of his actions for perhaps the first time in his adult life. With no family bailout forthcoming, he had to find regular employment. According to an update from my mother, he was working as an assistant manager at an electronics store, a job he considered beneath him, but that provided steady income. "He's very unhappy. She reported the implication clear, that his unhappiness was somehow my fault. "I'm sorry to hear that," I replied. "Starting over can be hard, but sometimes it's necessary for growth." My own life continued to flourish. The exhibition I had been preparing opened to critical acclaim, establishing me as a significant voice in the Pacific Northwest art scene. Thomas and I began tentatively discussing marriage, a step I would never have been ready for before processing my family trauma. I even started creating art again myself, something I had abandoned years ago when the pressures of supporting my family consumed all my creative energy. Then, 6 months after the foreclosure crisis began, something unexpected happened. My father called on a Sunday afternoon. "Joyce," he said, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "I've been doing some thinking. The financial counselor you recommended has been helpful. We've worked out a modified payment plan with the bank, and we're going to be able to keep the house, though we had to downsize a lot of other things." "That's good news, Dad. I'm glad the resources were useful." There was a long pause before he continued. "I've also been thinking about some of the things you said, about patterns and responsibility." Another pause. "I might not have been entirely fair to you over the years." Coming from my father, this halting near acknowledgement was equivalent to a profound apology. I sat down, taken aback by this shift. "Thank you for saying that," I managed to reply. "Your mother still doesn't see it," he added. "And Adam, well, Adam is Adam, but I wanted you to know that I've been reflecting. The counselor suggested I might benefit from some therapy myself to understand why I've always been harder on you than on your brother. I'm considering it." We spoke for another few minutes, the conversation awkward but more genuine than any we'd had in my adult life. When we hung up, I sat in stunned silence, trying to process this small but significant shift. My mother remained more resistant to change. In her calls, she still minimized my accomplishments and made excuses for Adam, though she had stopped explicitly asking me for money. She couldn't or wouldn't acknowledge the favoritism that had defined our family dynamic, but she did express interest in visiting Seattle. Someday, a tentative opening I approached with cautious optimism. Adam and I had no direct contact for nearly a year. Then shortly after my 33rd birthday, an email appeared in my inbox with his name. "I'm not good at apologies," it began, "but I'm trying to make some changes. The past year has been hard, but maybe necessary. I've been seeing a therapist too, and she's helping me understand some things about how our family works. I'm not ready to talk about everything yet, but I wanted to say, I'm sorry for expecting you to always bail me out. That wasn't fair." It wasn't a complete reckoning, but it was something. I replied with appreciation for his message and openness to continuing the conversation when he felt ready. Our subsequent exchanges were infrequent and cautious, but devoid of the entitlement that had characterized our previous interactions. Through all these changes, I maintained my boundaries. I offered emotional support and practical advice when asked, but I no longer sent money or dropped everything when family drama erupted. I scheduled regular visits to my therapist to process the complex feelings that arose as these new dynamics emerged. And I continued building my life in Seattle, investing in relationships that were healthy and reciprocal. The healing process wasn't linear. There were setbacks, like when my mother reverted to guilt tactics after I declined to attend a family reunion, or when my father expressed disappointment that I wasn't more supportive when Adam started yet another business venture. But these incidents no longer devastated me. I could recognize the manipulation, refuse to engage with it, and continue forward without internalizing their disapproval. My relationship with Thomas deepened, built on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine care. When he proposed during a hike overlooking Puget Sound, I said yes without reservations, confident that we were creating a partnership, nothing like the dysfunction I had grown up with. My art career continued to thrive. I was invited to curate a traveling exhibition that would visit major galleries across the country, including one in Minneapolis. When I shared this news with my parents, my mother actually expressed pride, a reaction so unfamiliar that I had to ask her to repeat herself. "I said we're proud of you, Joyce," she repeated, sounding almost surprised at herself. "You've really made something of yourself in that art world of yours." It wasn't the wholehearted validation I had once desperately craved, but it was movement in a direction I had never thought possible. Perhaps the most profound change was within myself. The little girl who had believed she was somehow fundamentally less worthy than her brother had grown into a woman who knew her value. The young adult who had bankrupted herself trying to buy family approval had become someone who understood that real love doesn't come with financial obligations. The person who had once defined herself through others' expectations now lived authentically on her own terms. In therapy one day, discussing the ongoing evolution of my family relationships, I had an insight that brought tears to my eyes. I think what hurt most all those years wasn't just the favoritism, I told Dr. Marina. It was that I believed their assessment of me was true, that I really was less valuable, less worthy of investment and care. Breaking free wasn't just about escaping their treatment, it was about rejecting their entire narrative about who I am. "And who are you, Joyce?" she asked gently. I smiled through my tears. "I'm enough. Just as I am, without proving anything or giving anything or changing anything. I'm already enough." That realization was the true gift of my journey, more valuable than any financial security or career success. By walking away from toxic patterns, I had found something I never would have discovered had I stayed myself. As I planned my wedding and prepared for my exhibition's national tour, I reflected on the strange circular path that had brought me here. The family that had once dismissed my needs was now making halting efforts to acknowledge my worth. The brother who had been placed on a pedestal was now struggling to find stable ground. And I, the invisible daughter, had become vibrantly, undeniably visible, not just to others, but finally, most importantly, to myself. Sometimes walking away is the first step to finding your true self, and ironically, the only way your family might finally see your worth. Have you ever had to create distance from loved ones to find your own path? Comment below with your experience. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more journeys of self-discovery and healing. Remember, choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's the foundation of every healthy relationship you'll ever build. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find the courage to honor your own worth, whatever that looks like for you.